TIFU by accidentally becoming the worst wedding guest in history. So, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a complete idiot. I'm not a socially inept person. I know basic etiquette, and I generally can hold my own in social situations. But sometimes, fate likes to drop you into situations where even the best intentions go completely sideways. It all started when I got invited to my cousin Lucy's wedding. Lucy and I weren't super close, but we'd hung out during family events, and we got along well enough. She's one of those people who throws huge, extravagant parties for every occasion, so naturally, her wedding was going to be over the top. Think 5-star venue, gourmet food, live band, the whole shebang. Now, here's where things start going wrong. I'm not married, and I have very little experience with weddings. I've been to a couple of them, but I'm the type who kind of zones out during the ceremony, just focusing on the food and hoping someone at the table has a good sense of humor. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, I just don't really get the whole holy union thing, and I tend to find the ceremonies a little long and drawn out. Anyway, I was looking forward to a good meal and a couple of drinks, which is why I didn't give the invitation much thought. I just RSVP'd yes and picked out a snazzy suit I had hanging in my closet from a previous wedding. I thought, how hard can it be? Show up, sit down, eat, maybe dance a little, then leave. The day of the wedding rolls around, and I'm feeling pretty good. I even got a haircut, which is something I rarely do. I get to the venue early, which, looking back, was probably my first mistake. I was one of the first guests to arrive, so I stand awkwardly in the lobby for a bit. I'm checking out my phone, scrolling through some memes, just passing the time. After a while, some other guests start to show up, and things seem to be going fine. The staff hand me a drink, and I'm feeling like I'm on top of the world. The venue is gorgeous, and I'm actually kind of impressed. But then things start to go wrong. Lucy, the bride, comes over to say hello. She looks absolutely stunning, like, jaw-droppingly beautiful. We exchange pleasantries, and she's just so happy and glowing. I try my best to be supportive and compliment her on how amazing the venue looks. But then, in my infinite wisdom, I make a joke. A harmless one. At least, I thought it was harmless. I said, "Wow, Lucy, this place looks like it cost as much as my entire house. Are you sure you're not getting married at a 5-star resort?" She laughs, which gives me a moment of relief. But then she pauses, looking a little confused. Well, actually, the venue is part of a special deal with the hotel. It's kind of all-inclusive, so we're actually saving a lot of money. And that's when I realized I might have made a mistake. The whole save money thing didn't exactly sound glamorous, and it didn't exactly fit with the lavish setup I'd seen. I tried to laugh it off, but in my panic, I added, "Oh, yeah, I totally get it. Weddings are so expensive these days, it's like people are paying off a mortgage for just one day. Who needs a house when you've got a ceremony like this?" Lucy gave me a tight smile and then walked away. I could feel the awkwardness creeping in, but I didn't think it was too bad. I'm sure she was just busy with last-minute details. No harm, no foul, right? Wrong. As the evening progresses, I'm sitting at a table with some distant relatives I don't know very well. The conversation is bland, but I'm trying my best to be sociable. It's mostly small talk, how's the weather, how's work, how's the family, but then someone brings up how expensive weddings are these days. And that's when I open my big mouth again. I say, honestly, it's ridiculous. I read somewhere that the average wedding costs like $35,000. And most people don't even enjoy it. It's all for the photos and social media. I bet you could buy a car with that kind of money and have a way better time. I immediately regret it. I feel a chill in the air as my relatives awkwardly look at each other. One aunt coughs, and someone else changes the subject. But I can't help myself. I keep going, trying to justify my position like an idiot. I mean, look at this place, I gesture around. This could be a small fortune. I'm just saying, it's kind of a waste. At this point, I realize I'm digging myself into a hole, but I'm too far in to stop. The next few minutes are a blur of forced smiles and uncomfortable silences. Finally, Lucy comes back to check on the guests, and I see her face fall as she approaches my table. Her smile fades, and I can tell she's upset. "Hey, is everything okay?" she asks, clearly trying to maintain her composure. Without missing a beat, my big mouth decides now is the perfect time to keep digging. "Oh, I'm just saying, I think it's awesome you're getting married and everything, but I don't know if people realize how much they're spending on one day. It's just, seems a little over the top, right?" Lucy's face goes pale. She takes a deep breath and then, in a voice so calm it's almost eerie, says, "Actually, I'm very proud of this day. We've worked hard to make it affordable and meaningful for everyone. This is what we wanted. So maybe keep those thoughts to yourself, okay?" I freeze. I try to apologize, but it's too late. The damage is done. Lucy walks away, and the rest of the evening goes downhill fast. The mood is awkward, people stop talking to me, and I can feel the judgment in the air. I don't think I've ever been more embarrassed in my life. By the time the reception rolls around, I'm feeling like the worst person in the room. I sit at my table, avoiding eye contact, and eat my meal in silence. I don't dance, and I don't talk to anyone. I just wait for the night to end so I can crawl back to my car and never speak to anyone at this wedding again. Lucy and her husband leave for their honeymoon the next day, and I never hear the end of it. A few weeks later, my mom calls me and says, "So, your cousin's not too happy with you. She thinks you kind of ruined her wedding day." I wanted to crawl into a hole and never come out. I sent her an apology message, but I'm not sure it did much. To this day, I'm known as the person who made the wedding all about how expensive weddings are. TLDR, I made a bunch of awkward, ill-timed comments about how expensive weddings are at my cousin's wedding, ruining the mood and making me the worst guest there. Never been more embarrassed in my life. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU, by trying to impress my girlfriend with a fancy dinner, and ending up with a small house fire, a ruined reputation, and a very awkward situation. So, a bit of backstory. I've been dating this amazing woman for about 6 months now. Her name is Sarah, and she's the kind of person who loves the small things, romantic gestures, thoughtful surprises, and anything that involves food. The way to her heart, I've learned, is through cooking. She's mentioned multiple times that she loves when people cook for her, especially if it's something homemade and a little bit fancy. I've always been a decent cook, but I'm not exactly a Michelin star chef. However, I figured I could do something special. I had seen a few recipes for a romantic dinner online and decided that tonight would be the night I'd go all out. I was going to cook her a multi-course meal, complete with appetizer, entree, and dessert. Nothing too crazy, but I wanted to show her that I could be a thoughtful and skilled boyfriend. I spent all afternoon preparing. I went to the local farmer's market to get fresh ingredients, organic vegetables, fresh herbs, the best cuts of meat I could find. I was feeling pretty proud of myself for this level of effort. I even dressed up, put on a nice shirt and everything, because I was really trying to set the mood. The plan was simple, a caprese salad to start, followed by a classic beef Wellington with mashed potatoes and roasted asparagus. For dessert, I was making a homemade chocolate mousse. Nothing too difficult, just a little ambitious for someone who hasn't done much fancy cooking in the past. The first hiccup came when I realized that my kitchen was not nearly as well equipped as I had imagined. I forgot that I didn't actually have a proper roasting pan for the Wellington, so I ended up using a baking dish that was way too small. But I improvised, wrapped it up in some foil, and shoved it in the oven, praying it wouldn't turn into a disaster. It wasn't the worst mistake, but it was a sign that things were already starting to spiral a little. Next, I started working on the chocolate mousse, which, to be honest, was where I got a little too cocky. I had watched a YouTube tutorial and felt like I could follow it without needing to pay too much attention. I mean, how hard could it be to melt some chocolate, whip some cream, and fold it together? Turns out, when you're stressed out and trying to impress someone, everything can go wrong. I misjudged the timing on melting the chocolate. In my mind, I thought I could melt it quickly in the microwave, but I forgot to stir it regularly, and I ended up with a burned mess. I panicked and decided to salvage it by adding more cream, but the texture was completely off, and it just wasn't working. I tried to salvage it by adding more ingredients, but it ended up looking like a sad, soupy mess. At this point, I was just trying to figure out how to make it look presentable while simultaneously praying that the Wellington was cooking properly in the oven. Now, I'm in full-blown panic mode. The Wellington's been in the oven for longer than I'd planned, and the smell is starting to get weird. I open the oven door to check, and a cloud of smoke billows out. I can feel the panic setting in as I see that the beef Wellington has started to burn on one side. I start freaking out, trying to adjust the oven temperature and hoping that somehow, it won't be completely ruined. At this point, Sarah is on her way over. I can hear her texting me, telling me she's about 10 minutes away. I realize I don't even have time to fix this disaster. The mousse looks like something out of a nightmare, the Wellington's practically inedible, and the kitchen is an absolute mess. My best option at this point is to clean up as much as I can, throw the awful mousse in the fridge to pretend like it's setting, and then try to salvage the dinner somehow. But fate was not done with me yet. While I was cleaning up, I turned around to find that I'd left the stovetop burner on. I had been trying to melt some butter to use for the mashed potatoes, but I got so caught up in everything else that I forgot about it. The butter had melted and started to burn in the pan, and I didn't notice it until I heard a loud crackling noise. I turn around just in time to see a small flame flickering on the edge of the pan. My heart stops for a moment as I realize that I am, in fact, about to burn down my kitchen. I grab the pan and try to carry it to the sink to put out the flame, but the second I start moving it, the flame gets bigger. Panicking, I toss the pan into the sink, and it turns into a full-on kitchen fire. At this point, I'm just frantically grabbing a towel and waving it around in a desperate attempt to put it out. I hear a knock at the door. It's Sarah. I open the door with a smile that I'm sure looks more like a grimace, and she steps inside. The first thing she notices is the smoke in the air and the general chaos of the kitchen. She asks, "What's going on in here?" as I stand there, holding a charred towel, covered in flour and chocolate. Just cooking, babe." "Just cooking," I say, trying to sound casual but knowing full well that I look like a complete disaster. She takes one look at the mess and then at my face, and it's at that moment I realize that I've completely failed at my attempt to impress her. "I'm so sorry," I say, feeling like a complete idiot. "I really wanted to make you a nice dinner, and everything went wrong." Sarah starts laughing. Not in a mean way, but in a way that makes me feel even worse. "Oh my God," she says, "you're not kidding. This is like the aftermath of a kitchen apocalypse." She takes a step into the kitchen, surveying the damage. The beef Wellington looks like a sad, blackened slab of meat. The chocolate mousse is a mess of broken texture and spilled cream. And the fire extinguisher is now out of place on the counter, evidence of my failed attempt to douse the flames. "I'm so sorry," I say again. "I really wanted to impress you, but I don't know what happened." To my surprise, she doesn't get mad or disappointed. Instead, she pulls me into a hug and says, "Honestly, this is kind of amazing. I've never had a dinner date turn into a disaster like this before." We both start laughing, and it's actually a pretty funny moment. I'm still embarrassed, but I can tell that Sarah isn't upset. We ended up ordering pizza and watching a movie, and the night turned out fine. In the end, I learned that it's not about how fancy the dinner is, it's about the effort you put into it and the fact that you can laugh at yourself when things go wrong. But yeah, I definitely won't be trying to cook a fancy meal like that again anytime soon. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. My friends and I had been talking for weeks about having a big cookout. We'd had the usual barbecues, the typical grilled burgers and hot dogs, but this time I wanted to step it up. I was determined to make something impressive. I wanted to show off my skills, you know? The kind of thing you see in cooking shows. So I thought, why not try making a homemade pizza from scratch? I'd made pizzas before, but only the simple kind, with pre-made dough and store-bought sauce. This time, I was going all out. I was going to make the dough from scratch, the sauce from tomatoes I would crush myself, and the toppings would be gourmet. I was going to be the pizza master. How hard could it be? I spent the entire morning watching videos about how to make pizza dough. I watched a dozen different tutorials, noting every detail. The key, according to most of them, was patience. Patience and the right technique. There were a lot of words I didn't quite understand, like proofing and autolyse, but I figured I could figure it out. After all, it was just dough, right? Flour, water, yeast, how complicated could it be? I grabbed the ingredients from the store. Flour, yeast, sugar, olive oil, and salt. I figured I'd pick up some fancy cheeses while I was there, some mozzarella, ricotta, and a little bit of parmesan for the topping. I was going to make a pizza that would blow everyone away. The first step was making the dough. I mixed the yeast with warm water and a pinch of sugar to activate it. I stood there, staring at the bowl, waiting for the yeast to bubble and foam as the video had promised. It was supposed to be a sign that the yeast was alive and ready to work its magic. I waited. And waited. And waited some more. Nothing happened. The water looked just wet. I poked it with my finger, even tried stirring it a little, but still, no foam. I was starting to panic. Maybe the water was too hot? Or maybe the yeast was expired? I didn't know, but at that point, I had already committed to making this pizza and there was no turning back. I figured I'd add a little more sugar, see if that helped. Spoiler alert, it didn't. By this time, I was feeling pretty defeated, but I was determined to not give up. I continued with the rest of the recipe, adding the flour, salt, and olive oil to the mix. The dough looked like something out of a horror movie, lumpy, sticky, and slightly alien. But I pushed on, kneading it like the tutorial said, waiting for it to become smooth. It didn't. It was as though the dough was mocking me, refusing to cooperate. After about 20 minutes of kneading, I decided that it was probably fine and put it in a bowl, covering it with a damp towel, and setting it aside to rise. Now, according to the videos, this was the critical point. The dough had to rise in a warm environment for about an hour. So I carefully set it on the counter and then went to take a shower to get ready for the evening. While I was in the shower, I thought about the toppings. I had decided to go with a mix of gourmet ingredients, sun-dried tomatoes, arugula, and prosciutto. I even bought a fresh basil plant. I was feeling like a true chef at this point. The sauce was the next hurdle. I figured if I made it myself, it would be 1,000 times better than store-bought. I grabbed a couple of fresh tomatoes, some garlic, and olive oil, and began to cook them down into a sauce. The smell was incredible. It was starting to feel like I was really doing this thing. The sauce thickened perfectly, and I seasoned it with a little salt and pepper. Things were finally going right. After showering, I checked on the dough. It had definitely risen, but when I pulled the cloth off, I noticed something strange. It wasn't just doubled in size like the videos had promised, it was practically oozing over the side of the bowl. It had expanded so much it looked like a yeast monster ready to break free. I had to scrape it out, and it stuck to everything. The dough felt wrong. But there was no time to dwell on that. The friends were coming soon, and I was not about to go down without a fight. I tried to stretch the dough into a pizza shape, but it kept tearing. Eventually, I resorted to rolling it out with a bottle of wine because, well, I didn't own a rolling pin. At this point, The dough had become more of a weird pancake shape, but I convinced myself it was fine. Who needed a perfectly round pizza anyway? I preheated the oven to 475 degrees Fahrenheit, as per the recipe instructions, and slapped the dough onto a baking sheet. Next up was sauce. I spread it across the dough, making sure to coat it evenly. The sauce was a little chunky, but I liked it that way. Then came the cheese. I grated the mozzarella and ricotta, heaping it onto the pizza like I was building an edible mountain. Finally, I added the sun-dried tomatoes, prosciutto, and a few leaves of basil. The pizza went into the oven, and I set a timer for 15 minutes. I could already imagine the look on my friends' faces when they tasted it. This was going to be the moment I became a pizza legend. At the 12-minute mark, I started to smell something. It wasn't the delicious, warm aroma of pizza, it was burning. I opened the oven, and there it was. My dough had inflated into a massive, charred, doughy disaster. The cheese had melted, but it had mostly melted off the edges and dripped onto the oven, leaving a pile of goo on the floor of the oven. The pizza had somehow risen so much that it was now in the shape of a small pizza mountain, bubbling with burnt cheese and sad, sad toppings. I pulled it out, and it was a disaster. It was unevenly cooked, blackened on the bottom, and a weird texture that you couldn't even begin to describe. My friends were arriving soon, and there was no way I could serve them this monstrosity. The dough had turned into a mix of chewy and crusty in all the wrong places. I considered ordering takeout, but I was already in too deep. So, I did what any self-respecting cook would do, I tried to salvage it. I cut the pizza into slices, hoping that by some miracle, the burnt crust would be hidden beneath a pile of arugula and a drizzle of balsamic. When my friends showed up, I presented the pizza with pride, though it looked more like a deflated tire than an Italian delicacy. They didn't say anything at first, but the looks on their faces said it all. One of them tentatively took a bite, then immediately tried to hide their grimace. "It's interesting," they said, while another friend was too polite to say anything at all. But I knew the truth. It wasn't pizza. It was a travesty. We ended up ordering takeout anyway. The pizza, despite my best efforts, had been nothing short of a disaster. But, at least I learned something valuable that day. Sometimes, it's okay to leave the cooking to the professionals. And never trust a YouTube video when you're making pizza from scratch. TIFU by accidentally starting a small fire at my neighbor's house, and almost getting arrested because of it. So this happened last weekend, and I'm still reeling from the aftermath. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business, and your biggest worry is the lawn being a few inches too high. The people next door, the McCarthys, are a sweet older couple who have lived there for decades. They've been like the neighborhood's grandparents, always giving out cookies during the holidays, checking in on everyone, and generally making the place feel a little warmer. They're lovely people, and I've always tried to be a good neighbor. Anyway, the McCarthys had just left for a weekend trip to visit their daughter in another state. Before they left, Mrs. MacArthur asked me if I could water their plants while they were away. Being a good, friendly person, I, of course, agreed. I've done it before for them, and I thought it would be no big deal. It started off well enough. I grabbed their spare key, let myself into their house, and started my usual routine. Their home smells like fresh-baked cookies even when there's nothing in the oven, and it always puts me in a good mood. They had a few plants inside and some on the back porch, so I started watering everything, making sure to be thorough. While I was tending to the garden in the backyard, I noticed they had a couple of potted plants near the grill area. The grill was one of those big, old-school ones, the kind that you have to light with a match or lighter fluid. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it's important to note that the grill had some grease stains on the side. You know the ones, where it looks like it hasn't been cleaned in years. I had never really paid much attention to the grill before, but as I was watering the plants, I thought, hey, why not be nice and clean the grill while I'm here? It looked like it could use a good scrub, and I figured it would be a nice surprise for when the McCarthys got back. I grabbed the cleaning supplies they kept in the shed. I had no idea how long they'd had them, but everything seemed in order. There was a scrubbing brush, a bucket of soapy water, and a few old towels. The first thing I noticed was the bottle of lighter fluid sitting next to the grill. The lid was loose, and it looked like some of the fluid had spilled onto the ground around the grill. I didn't think much of it. I just assumed it was old, and I moved the bottle a few feet away from the grill, out of the way. I started scrubbing away at the grease, feeling quite proud of myself for doing something extra. I might have gone a little overboard, but it was kind of fun. I was so focused on getting every nook and cranny cleaned that I didn't notice how close I was getting to the open bottle of lighter fluid. A few minutes later, I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing near the base of the grill, and that's when the unthinkable happened. A gust of wind came through, and I thought I smelled something strange. I turned my head to see a small flicker of flame near the bottom of the grill. It was subtle at first, like the tiniest little spark. I didn't even really process what I was seeing until the flame grew larger. My first thought was that maybe the grill was still warm from the last time it was used, but then I realized that the spilled lighter fluid must have caught fire. In a panic, I stood up and backed away from the grill, but by then, the fire had spread a bit. It wasn't massive, but it was definitely a real fire now. I immediately ran to the garden hose, but, of course, the water pressure was barely a trickle. I yanked on the hose with all my strength, frantically trying to get more water out, but nothing came. I could see the flames creeping up the sides of the grill, and I started to freak out. I didn't want to be the person who burned down their neighbor's house. I didn't even know what to do. I'm not exactly the calm, collected type in an emergency. In a state of panic, I did the only thing I could think of. I called 911. I was hyperventilating by this point, trying to explain what happened to the dispatcher, who, bless her heart, was probably trying to keep her cool while I was losing mine. She told me that fire trucks were on the way, and to stay a safe distance away from the flames. But, as I looked at the growing fire, I could hear sirens approaching, and I started to think I was going to be in serious trouble. If the fire department saw me, they'd probably think I was the one who started it intentionally. I wanted to hide. I seriously considered running away. But then I thought, what if they think I set the fire on purpose? What if the McCarthys find out I caused it and never speak to me again? And then, of course, I started to imagine the worst-case scenario where the McCarthys would press charges, and I'd be the neighbor who ruined their entire vacation. My mind spiraled. The fire trucks showed up soon after. They rushed into the backyard and started spraying water on the grill, and within a few minutes, the fire was out. I stood there in stunned silence, watching the firefighters, who didn't even seem to care about the greasy grill. They were just doing their job. The chief came over to me and asked if I was the one who called. I nodded, practically shaking at this point. He gave me a look that I couldn't quite read. Was it judgment? Concern? I couldn't tell. He asked me a few more questions about what had happened. I explained how I was just trying to clean the grill, and then the lighter fluid caught fire. He nodded, but I could see his mind working, trying to make sure everything added up. After what felt like forever, he finally just sighed and said, "Well, you're lucky this wasn't worse. Don't go playing with fire again, all right?" Then he patted me on the shoulder like I was some kind of well-meaning idiot. I nodded profusely, apologizing like a broken record. The next few days were filled with me waiting for some kind of fallout. The McCarthys came home, and when they found out what happened, they were surprisingly chill about it. They even said they were just glad I called the fire department before it got out of control. Still, I could tell they were a little taken aback by how out of hand it had gotten. They even joked about putting a "Don't touch the grill" sign up next time. I'm never touching another grill again. Not for anyone. Not for any reason. I've learned my lesson. In hindsight, it wasn't even the fire that scared me the most. It was the thought of what would have happened if I hadn't acted quickly enough, or if the fire had spread further. I could have ended up causing serious damage to their property, or worse, gotten myself arrested. But hey, at least I'm not the guy who burned down the neighborhood, right? I'll stick to watering plants from now on. That's much safer. Moral of the story: never touch other people's grills, and definitely never mess with lighter fluid. Just water the plants and leave it at that. TIFU by accidentally sending a heartfelt confession to my crush's dad instead of him. So, a little background. I, 24M, have been in love with this guy I met about 6 months ago. Let's call him Dave, 26M. We met at a mutual friend's party, and after a few conversations, I realized I had a pretty serious crush on him. He was kind, smart, funny, and easy to talk to. He's the type of person who effortlessly makes everyone around him feel comfortable, and I admired that about him. He even went out of his way to introduce me to his friends, making me feel like I was part of the group. For the past few months, we've hung out a lot, and I've had plenty of opportunities to get to know him better. However, I never had the guts to tell him how I felt. Every time I thought about confessing, I chickened out. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if it ruined our friendship? I couldn't risk that, especially since we had such a great dynamic already. One night, we were out at a bar celebrating a mutual friend's birthday, and I decided that it was time. I had been talking to some friends who had encouraged me to take the plunge, and I figured if I didn't do it that night, I'd never have the courage again. So, after a few drinks and some casual conversation, I finally felt like it was the right moment. Dave had stepped outside to take a phone call, so I decided to text him something that had been on my mind for weeks. Here's where the F-up comes in. I decided to go all in. I typed out this long, heartfelt message where I told him everything I was feeling. I mentioned how I had developed feelings for him, how much I enjoyed our time together, and how I valued our friendship above all. I told him that I understood if he didn't feel the same way, but I needed him to know. I poured my heart into the message, and I hit send, feeling a wave of both relief and anxiety wash over me. A few seconds later, I realized I made a huge mistake. I saw the name on my phone screen and realized that I had just sent that message, not to Dave, but to his dad. His dad. Now, to give you some context, Dave and his dad share a contact name in my phone, which was something like Dave/Dad. Clever, right? This is where I messed up. I had been texting Dave earlier in the day, so when I went to send the message to him, I didn't double-check the recipient. I was so caught up in the moment that I just assumed it would be going to his number. But, of course, my finger slipped, and it went straight to the contact that read Dave/Dad. I immediately froze. My phone buzzed with a notification that read, "Message sent." I stared at the screen, horrified. My heart literally sank into my stomach. I had just sent a message meant for my crush to his father. His dad. The man I'd met only a few times, who was always so kind but also a bit intimidating to me. The man who knew absolutely nothing about my feelings for his son. I panicked. I considered quickly texting back something like, "Sorry, wrong person," but what could I say that wouldn't make it worse? How could I explain that I had just confessed my feelings to my crush's father? There was no way that would go over well. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. Then, in a fit of desperation, I tried calling Dave. He didn't pick up. Of course he didn't. He was busy on the phone outside, and I didn't have the courage to leave a voicemail. I kept thinking, okay, maybe this is just a mistake, and I'll never hear from him about it again. But deep down, I knew that wasn't realistic. How could I ignore the fact that I had essentially just sent a heartfelt confession to my crush's dad? My stomach was doing flips. I could already imagine the awkward conversation that was about to unfold. I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, but I knew better. This was going to be an absolute disaster. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Dave's dad. "Hey, my name, I think there's been a mistake here. This message wasn't meant for me, was it?" I read those words, and my heart dropped. I knew it was only a matter of time before this got awkward, but seeing it in writing made it even worse. My palms were sweaty, and my face felt like it was on fire. I didn't know how to respond, but I had no choice but to address it. I quickly typed back, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was meant for Dave. I don't know how I messed that up. Please don't tell him." There was a long pause before I got a response from him. "I won't tell him, but I think you should. You're a great guy, and I'm sure Dave will appreciate hearing how you feel. No harm done." I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was this man really being this understanding? I figured he might laugh it off or make some awkward comment, but instead, he was being surprisingly supportive. At this point, I was even more embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was for Dave to find out about this in any way. I immediately sent a follow-up message to Dave's dad, telling him how much I appreciated his understanding. I apologized again, and I tried to make light of the situation, but I'm sure it only made it worse. About 20 minutes later, Dave finally called me back. My hands were shaking as I answered the phone. "Hey, my name, is everything okay? I got a weird message from my dad. He said you sent something kind of personal to him instead of me," he asked, sounding a little confused but not mad. I could feel my face flush even more. Yeah, about that. I accidentally sent him a message that was meant for you. I didn't mean for it to go to him." Dave laughed, clearly amused by the situation. "Oh, man, you really sent that to my dad? He texted me and said he wouldn't tell me, but now I kind of want to know what you said." I could barely speak. I was mortified. "I'm so sorry, Dave. I didn't know what to do. I'm really embarrassed." After a long pause, Dave said, "Honestly, you don't need to be embarrassed. I'm glad you told me how you feel. I've actually been thinking about telling you something, too. I like you too, my name." I was just waiting for the right moment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like a dream. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long suddenly lifted. Dave liked me too. We talked for a bit longer, and everything turned out fine. We agreed to meet up the next day to talk things through in person. Still, I'll never live down the fact that I confessed my feelings for him to his dad first. Moral of the story: always double-check the recipient before hitting send, especially when you're texting your crush's father. You might accidentally get more than you bargained for. Oh, and I now refer to Dave's dad as the accidental Cupid. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a surprise dinner and accidentally burning down my kitchen. It all started on a Friday night. I'd been dating Sarah for about 6 months, and I felt like things were going really well. She was great, smart, funny, beautiful, and we had a pretty solid connection. I wanted to do something special for her, so I decided to cook her dinner. Nothing too fancy, just a simple meal to show her how much I cared. I've never been a great cook. In fact, the last time I made dinner for myself was a disaster. But I figured, how hard could it be? I watched a couple of YouTube videos on easy romantic dinners and figured I could pull it off. Sarah always raved about how nice it was to have a homemade meal, so I thought, why not take it up a notch and surprise her? The plan was simple: I'd cook her favorite meal, make the place all romantic, and then we'd have a cozy evening together. I even got candles, wine, and some flowers to set the mood. The one thing I didn't have in the back of my mind was my complete lack of experience in the kitchen. Still, I was determined. I started the process in the late afternoon, making sure to follow the recipe to the letter. I decided on a chicken parmesan, which seemed like a safe bet. Not too complicated, right? Wrong. It started off fine. I seasoned the chicken, prepped the breadcrumbs, and set everything up on the counter. But then, I forgot one tiny detail: my oven was ancient, and it didn't have a working temperature gauge. I could tell the oven was heating up, but I had no idea how hot it actually was. No big deal, right? Just wing it, I thought. I popped the chicken in and set a timer. I figured 20 minutes should be enough. Well, it wasn't. About 15 minutes in, I began to smell something a little off. It wasn't the delicious scent of chicken cooking. No, it was more of a something is burning scent. I rushed over to the oven, opened the door, and was greeted by a plume of smoke. My heart sank. The chicken was charred. Completely black. I cursed under my breath, pulled the pan out, and checked the timer. It still had 5 minutes left, but clearly, the chicken was not going to make it. The thought of serving this charred monstrosity to Sarah was enough to make me panic. I tossed the chicken in the trash and started over. Okay, no big deal. I'd just make a fresh batch. But then, I remembered I needed to heat up the marinara sauce and pasta. So, I decided to get the sauce going on the stovetop. The sauce wasn't much of an issue, until I realized I'd left the pasta out. I grabbed the box of spaghetti, but I couldn't find a pot large enough to cook the entire thing. I had this one medium-sized pot, so I thought I'd try to cram the noodles in. It didn't go well. Noodles were sticking everywhere, and it looked like a hot mess. I was getting frustrated, but I refused to give up. I tried to salvage the situation by putting the pasta in the microwave for a few minutes, thinking that would help. No, it didn't. All I managed to do was make the noodles stick together into a giant, gooey, spaghetti clump. At this point, I was in full-on panic mode. Sarah would be here in less than an hour, and I was running out of time to make something presentable. In my frenzy, I tried to make up for the burnt chicken with some garlic bread. I threw it in the oven, but I must have forgotten about it for a little too long. By the time I remembered it, the garlic bread had become, well, toast. Not just any toast, but the kind of toast that's completely black and smells like it's been left in a fireplace for a week. Okay, I told myself. I can still pull this off. There was always plan B, wine and salad. So, I quickly grabbed some lettuce, threw together a basic salad, and opened a bottle of wine. I thought I could at least salvage the vibe, if not the dinner itself. The clock was ticking, and I had barely anything left to work with. I set the table, lit the candles, and put on some soft music to set the mood. When Sarah finally showed up, she was all smiles. I greeted her with a big hug, kissed her cheek, and led her to the table. I tried to act like everything was perfectly normal, but I could feel my heart racing. I was praying she wouldn't notice the smoke lingering in the air. She sat down and smiled at me. "This looks nice. You really went all out, huh?" she said. "Oh, just wanted to do something special," I replied, trying to sound casual while internally freaking out. I poured us each a glass of wine, trying to mask my nerves with a little bit of humor. "So, the chicken is, well, it's a bit of a surprise. But don't worry, I made sure the salad's good." I could see the skepticism in her eyes as she looked at the burnt offering of a meal in front of us. We both sat down, and I watched her take a tentative bite of the salad. "This is really good," she said, sounding somewhat surprised. She took a sip of wine and smiled again. But then, she reached for the garlic bread. I knew it was over when I saw her face. Her hand paused mid-air, and she turned to me with a questioning look. Is this supposed to be like this?" I turned to look at the garlic bread, which was so burnt it could probably be used to start a fire. Yeah. "It's rustic," I said, trying to sound like I had intended it that way. Then, the truth came out. She asked, "Did you, burn the chicken and everything?" "Just a little," I replied sheepishly. At that point, she burst out laughing. It wasn't mean-spirited, but it was definitely a "what were you thinking" kind of laugh. "Oh my God, babe. This is a disaster," she said between giggles. I couldn't help but laugh too. "Yeah, it really is, huh?" We ended up ordering pizza instead, and I spent the next 30 minutes cleaning up the disaster in the kitchen. Honestly, though, we had a blast. We talked and laughed about it the whole night, and even though the dinner was a complete failure, it was still one of the best nights we'd had. Sarah said she loved that I tried so hard, even if it didn't work out the way I planned. The next morning, I told her I'd try again sometime, but I was going to leave the cooking to the professionals. She agreed, but jokingly told me to stick to grilled cheese sandwiches from now on. So yeah, I completely ruined a romantic dinner by trying to impress my girlfriend with a home-cooked meal. It wasn't my finest moment, but at least we got a good laugh out of it. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Moral of the story: never trust an oven without a temperature gauge, and always remember that burnt garlic bread is not rustic. Also, when in doubt, pizza always saves the day. So, I did a thing. A big thing. The kind of thing you can only really explain with a deep sigh and a half-hearted laugh. I think I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life. It all started last weekend when I had some time off from work. I'd been getting increasingly stressed about everything: work, relationships, finances, and I figured it was time to treat myself to a little self-care. You know, the whole pampering yourself routine. I decided to go all in: facial, massage, the works. I booked an appointment at this nice spa that had just opened in the area. The reviews were stellar, the pictures looked great, and it seemed like the perfect way to relax and take my mind off of everything. Plus, I had been on the fence about getting a facial for a while, so this seemed like the perfect opportunity to finally give it a try. Spoiler: I'll never look at facials the same way again. I arrived at the spa early, as per usual, and the receptionist greeted me with the most over-the-top enthusiasm I've ever encountered. She looked at me like I had just walked into a 5-star restaurant instead of a mid-tier spa. I was a little taken aback but chalked it up to her being friendly. She handed me a form to fill out, which I didn't really think much of. I mean, how bad could it be, right? When I handed the form back, the receptionist gave me this weird look. She asked if I had any allergies, which I thought was a reasonable question for a facial. So, I checked the box that said no allergies and handed it back to her. She nodded but kept staring at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, almost like she was waiting for me to confess something. I just smiled awkwardly, and she eventually led me to the waiting area. I sat down, flipping through a magazine, when a woman came out to call my name. She was introduced as Maria, and I assumed she was my esthetician for the day. She led me to one of those dimly lit rooms with soothing music playing in the background. She asked me to take off my top and put on a robe, which I did. As I sat there, waiting for her to return, I started to feel a little more at ease, even though I was still slightly unsure about what was coming. Maria came back in, wearing gloves and carrying what looked like a tool I hadn't seen in any of the spa promo pictures. It was some kind of handheld device, with a lot of buttons and knobs. She smiled reassuringly and said, "All right, we're going to start with a deep cleansing facial, followed by extractions. It's going to feel a little uncomfortable, but you'll feel amazing afterward." I nodded, but the word extractions lingered in my head. I had no idea what she meant, but I assumed it was part of the process. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. She began with the cleansing routine, which was fine. It wasn't anything special, just some warm cloths, a little exfoliating scrub, and that familiar sensation of someone's hands pressing against your skin. But then things started getting weird. I felt a slight pressure on my face, like she was really pushing something into my pores. The weirdness grew as she started to squeeze different parts of my face, using the strange device she had brought with her. Every time she pressed down, it felt like she was digging into my skin, but I thought, okay, this is probably normal. Just a little deeper clean. But then, she got to my nose. Maria looked like she was getting ready to perform some kind of surgical procedure. She kept pressing harder and harder, using both hands now, like she was trying to remove something that had been lodged inside my skin for decades. The sensation was unpleasant, to say the least, but I didn't want to seem like a wimp, so I kept quiet. I could feel my nostrils flare in discomfort as she dug into my face like a miner searching for gold. I thought to myself, okay, it's just a facial. It's supposed to hurt a little. But then, something strange happened. There was this popping sound, like the loud snap of a rubber band, followed by a strange, warm sensation. Is everything all right? I asked, trying to keep my cool. Oh, yes, Maria said nonchalantly. I just got a lot of build-up here. It's good that we're getting this out. I nodded, trying not to think too hard about the strange popping sound. But then, it started to smell. The faintest, most unmistakable scent of something. I couldn't quite place it, but it wasn't pleasant. It was like burnt plastic mixed with something metallic. I should have said something right then and there, but I didn't. I was too embarrassed. Too far gone. I figured it was part of the process. So, I just laid there, praying it would be over soon. And then, she moved to my chin. The pressure got even more intense. She was squeezing, pushing, and prodding like she was trying to perform open-heart surgery on my face. I could feel something leaking out of my skin, something warm, sticky, and utterly repulsive. At that point, I finally broke. Is this normal? I asked again, my voice trembling. Maria paused for a moment, looking at me like I had just asked the dumbest question in the history of facials. Oh, yes, it's completely normal. This is just part of the deep cleaning process. You'll feel much better once it's all out. I didn't feel better. I felt worse. I felt like my face was going to explode. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she finished up and told me to get dressed. I could barely look at myself in the mirror, but when I did, I was horrified. My face was red, swollen, and dotted with little patches of scabs where she had extracted whatever was under my skin. It was like someone had taken a cheese grater to my face, and the aftermath was much less glamorous than any spa ad I'd ever seen. I tried to go pay for the treatment, but when I got to the front desk, the receptionist gave me an even stranger look. She asked, "Would you like to leave a tip for your esthetician?" I was still too stunned to respond properly, but I just nodded. I gave a small tip, but honestly, I didn't know how to feel about the entire experience. I left the spa feeling like I had just walked out of a medical procedure. My face was in agony, and I knew I was going to look ridiculous for the next few days. But the worst part? A few days later, I noticed that the spots where Maria had extracted all that gunk were still red. They were starting to turn into tiny scars. The kind that don't go away easily. I tried to use some makeup to cover it up, but nothing helped. It was like I had given my face a makeover, only to make it worse. I'm still not sure what happened during that facial. Maybe it was my fault for not asking enough questions, or maybe Maria just got carried away with the whole extraction process. Either way, I'm now the proud owner of a permanent reminder that self-care isn't always as relaxing as it seems. So, lesson learned. Do your research before getting a facial, and maybe skip the deep extraction if you don't want to look like a science experiment afterward. And if you ever hear someone say, "This is going to feel a little uncomfortable," just know that they're probably lying to you. It's going to feel like a 50-ton truck running over your face. TIFU by accidentally causing a full-scale family drama at Thanksgiving. So, this happened a couple of years ago, and I still cringe every time I think about it. I was 25 at the time and had just started dating my now fiancée, Sarah. We had been together for about 6 months, and everything was going well. But then came Thanksgiving, and I made the decision that would haunt me forever. I invited her to spend the holiday with my family. Let me give you some context. My family is, well, they're complicated. My dad, Dan, is a retired Army colonel who loves to make everything a competition. My mom, Elaine, is super sweet but has a bit of a controlling side when it comes to holidays. I've got 2 older brothers, Mark, who's in his late 30s, and Nick, who's a bit of a wild card. Then there's my Aunt Lisa, who always makes things awkward by talking about her extensive travel experiences and how much better they are than anyone else's. And of course, my cousin Rachel, who is a social media influencer and insists on documenting everything, which somehow makes everything feel like a reality TV show. Sarah, on the other hand, is from a much smaller, quieter family. They're all very laid back, and Sarah had warned me about how non-dramatic they were, which made me a little nervous. But I thought, hey, it's Thanksgiving. It's a time for family to come together, and we've been dating long enough for me to introduce her to mine. What could possibly go wrong? I should have known. I should have known. It all started when Sarah arrived at my house. She looked stunning as usual. She was wearing this cozy, autumn-colored sweater and these cute ankle boots. I'm telling you, if you've ever been to a family Thanksgiving dinner, you'll know that the first thing everyone does is judge what you're wearing, so Sarah was already under the microscope. But she did great at first. My mom welcomed her with open arms, showering her with compliments, and they immediately began chatting about recipes and Pinterest boards, because yes, my mom is obsessed with Pinterest. My dad, of course, sized Sarah up like he was preparing for some kind of military operation. He was polite but distant, which is just his way of showing that he's assessing a new person for suitability. Things started to go sideways during dinner. Everything was going well, everyone was laughing, talking, and trying to avoid the usual awkward political conversations, because Thanksgiving with my family can easily turn into a debate club. But then my Aunt Lisa, being her usual self, started talking about how amazing her trip to Paris was. She's one of those people who goes on a trip and then acts like she's the only one who's ever been anywhere in the world. She pulled out her phone to show a video of herself at the Eiffel Tower, and of course, Rachel, my cousin, was right there, ready to document it all. In the middle of Lisa's grand storytelling, Sarah, being the polite person she is, asked, "Oh, did you go to any other countries while you were over there?" Lisa looked at her like she'd just asked her if she knew how to properly season a potato. Lisa then said, "Oh, darling, that's just a silly question. You wouldn't understand unless you've traveled as much as I have." Sarah, not missing a beat, smiled and said, "Actually, I've been to a few places myself. I recently went to Japan and spent some time in Kyoto." Now, you'd think this would be a harmless conversation, right? Wrong. My Aunt Lisa froze. Like, the kind of freeze you get when you realize you've just been upstaged. And then, as if flipping a switch, Lisa went into full "I'm going to ruin your day" mode. "Oh, well, I don't really consider Japan that impressive," she said, and I swear to God, the whole table went silent. I mean, it's just temples and sushi. Nothing like the rich cultural experiences you get in Europe. I wanted to crawl under the table. Sarah's face immediately went red, and I could see the embarrassment in her eyes. But Sarah, being the queen of grace under pressure, simply nodded and said, "I think Japan was beautiful in its own way, but I can appreciate how Europe has a lot to offer too." At this point, I was about to intervene and try to steer the conversation back to safe ground when Mark, my oldest brother, decided to speak up. He's always been the kind of guy who loves to stir the pot at family gatherings. He's kind of like the class clown, but way more malicious. "Dad," he said, grinning, "remember that time you tried to take us to France, and we ended up spending an entire afternoon stuck in an airport because you lost your passport?" Everyone started laughing nervously, but I could see the tension in my dad's eyes. That trip was a sore spot for him, and Mark knew it. Before my dad could respond, Nick, the wild card, leaned in and added, "Yeah, and then Mom almost made us turn around because she didn't like the hotel's decor." My mom immediately shot Nick a glare, but it was too late. Mark was already off to the races. "Yeah, so I guess we're all supposed to be impressed by Lisa's trips now, huh? Because Europe is the only place worth visiting?" This is where things took a sharp left turn. My aunt, not one to back down, clutched her wine glass and said, "Excuse me, Mark, I'm sorry you're too simple to appreciate real culture, but maybe you should stick to your wild camping trips or whatever it is you do in your spare time." That was the moment when the whole Thanksgiving dinner completely derailed. My dad slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "That's enough. This is supposed to be a family gathering, and all you're doing is tearing each other apart with your petty nonsense." Now, this is when I thought it couldn't possibly get worse. But then, Sarah, who had been quietly watching the drama unfold, stood up, looked at me, and said, "I think I need to go. This is way more than I was expecting." I felt my stomach drop. This was it. The moment everything fell apart. I tried to apologize, but it was too late. Sarah was already gathering her things, and I could tell from her expression that she was done. My mom, noticing this, immediately tried to smooth things over, but it was no use. Sarah didn't want to stay in a room full of chaos. We left, and as soon as we got outside, I tried to explain everything. I apologized for the behavior of my family and promised to make it up to her, but the damage had already been done. Sarah told me she needed some time to think about whether she wanted to continue dating me after that display. I spent the entire next week texting her, calling her, trying to apologize, but I don't blame her for taking a step back. It was, without a doubt, the most awkward Thanksgiving of my life. Long story short, Sarah eventually forgave me, but it wasn't without a lot of long talks about boundaries and family dynamics. I learned the hard way that sometimes, you need to protect the people you love from the chaos that comes with your family's dysfunction. And I also learned that no matter how nice someone looks in an autumn sweater, they are not prepared for a Thanksgiving dinner at my house. So yeah, TIFU by thinking that bringing my girlfriend to Thanksgiving was a good idea. Don't make the same mistake. Trust me. Hey, friends. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a homemade dinner and almost burning the house down. So, this all started a few weeks ago. My girlfriend, Emily, and I have been dating for about a year now, and everything's been going great. She's funny, smart, and just overall amazing. The problem, however, is that she's always been the one to cook. I mean, she's an incredible cook. Whenever we hang out at her place or mine, she's always whipping up something that looks like it's straight out of a food magazine. I, on the other hand, am, let's say, a little less talented in the kitchen. For the longest time, I've been thinking about trying to impress her with my own cooking. But every time I'd try, I'd either set off the smoke alarm, undercook everything, or just end up with a mess that looked like something you'd see in an abandoned kitchen. Still, I was determined to pull it off. I decided that this time, I was going to cook her a homemade dinner that would knock her socks off. I'd been watching cooking videos for weeks, picking up tips and tricks, and even bought a couple of cookbooks. My mission was clear: impress Emily, make her think I'm the domestic god I believe I could be, and hopefully get her to stop cooking for me all the time. The day of the big dinner, I got everything ready. I went to the grocery store in the morning, making sure to get all the ingredients for a fancy pasta dish: of spaghetti with a homemade marinara sauce, garlic bread, and a simple salad. Nothing too extravagant, but I figured it was a good place to start. I was confident. Sure, I'd burned toast before, but this time would be different. The first red flag should have been when I realized I didn't have a pot big enough to make the marinara sauce. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I decided to use a regular frying pan. I mean, who needs a big pot when you can just cook it in a pan, right? This was mistake number 1. I started with the garlic bread. I'm pretty sure anyone can make garlic bread, right? Just slap some butter on the bread, sprinkle some garlic, and pop it in the oven. No problem. But of course, I couldn't just follow the directions. I had to get creative. I decided to sprinkle some cheese on the bread to make it extra cheesy. The bread went into the oven, and I set the timer for 10 minutes. Mistake number 2, I forgot to check on the bread halfway through. I was too busy preparing the salad, trying to get the dressing just right. When I finally checked the bread, it was borderline charred. The edges were black, and the cheese had turned into a crusty layer of ash. I took it out of the oven, hoping Emily wouldn't notice. It was still somewhat edible. I thought. Next, I started on the marinara sauce. This was supposed to be the centerpiece of the meal, so I was determined to get it right. I chopped up the tomatoes, garlic, onions, and herbs, and threw everything into the frying pan. The aroma was promising. I was actually feeling pretty good about it. But here's where things went off the rails. As I was stirring the sauce, I got distracted. Emily had texted me, and I was reading her message about how excited she was for dinner. In my distraction, I didn't realize that the heat on the pan was too high, and the sauce started to bubble furiously. It splashed up and hit me in the face. I panicked and instinctively jerked back, knocking over the pan. The sauce splattered everywhere, on the walls, on the floor, and even on my shirt. I stood there for a second, frozen, covered in marinara sauce. I could hear Emily's voice in my head, wondering if this was going to be the night I finally broke my streak of cooking disasters. But I pressed on. I wiped up the mess as best as I could, trying to salvage what was left of the sauce. I thought about giving up, but I didn't want to disappoint her. After a few more minutes, I finally got the sauce to simmer down and was able to scrape the burnt bits off the bottom. It was a bit overcooked, but I could still salvage it. At least I hoped I could. The final part of the dinner was the pasta. I boiled the water, added the pasta, and waited. But the pasta was taking longer to cook than I remembered from my YouTube videos. And when I finally drained it, I realized I'd overcooked the noodles to a mushy mess. I tasted one, and it was the consistency of wet cardboard. My heart sank. How was I going to salvage this? Emily was going to walk in any minute, and I was about to serve her a plate of mush, blackened bread, and sauce that was only half salvageable. Still, I didn't give up. I set the table, plated the food as best as I could, and put everything on the dining table. I had to make it look decent, at least. I even lit a candle to create a nice atmosphere, though I was pretty sure the burnt bread smell would overwhelm any romantic vibes. When Emily arrived, she smiled brightly, complimenting me on how great the table looked. It was the moment I'd been waiting for, her seeing my efforts. But as she sat down and took her first bite, the smile quickly faded. She didn't say anything at first, but I could tell something was off. I watched as she forced down a few more bites, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I nervously asked, "So, how's everything? Is it good?" She hesitated. "It's, interesting." At that point, I knew I'd messed up. She wasn't going to lie to spare my feelings. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to be polite while not spitting out what was essentially a disaster. "It's just a little different from what I expected, but I really appreciate you trying." The guilt hit me like a ton of bricks. She was being so nice, and I couldn't bear it. I'd promised myself I'd impress her, and all I'd done was create a disaster of a meal. At this point, I tried to lighten the mood by laughing it off. "Well, hey, at least the bread's, crispy." She laughed, but it was one of those forced laughs. "Yeah, I think it's more charcoal than garlic bread." We both burst out laughing, and it was then I realized the truth. No amount of cooking skills would ever impress her more than just being myself. She didn't care about the food as much as she cared about me. And honestly, she was probably just relieved that I didn't burn the house down. We ended up ordering takeout and spent the rest of the night watching a movie on the couch, laughing about my failed cooking attempt. It wasn't the romantic dinner I had in mind, but it was perfect in its own way. And hey, at least I learned one thing: I'll leave the cooking to Emily from now on. The kitchen is her domain, and I'm okay with that. TLDR, tried to impress my girlfriend by cooking her a homemade dinner. Ended up burning the bread, overcooking the pasta, and spilling marinara sauce everywhere. Dinner was a disaster, but we ended up laughing and ordering takeout. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire in my apartment, and then making it worse by calling my landlord for help. Let me explain. So, about a week ago, I had just come back from a long day at work, feeling exhausted but determined to cook myself a nice dinner. Normally, I'm not much of a chef, but I've been trying to step up my game a little and learn how to cook more than just the usual microwave meals. I had decided to try making some homemade spaghetti with marinara sauce, a pretty easy meal, right? I had some tomatoes, pasta, garlic, and the other basics in my kitchen. I was feeling pretty good about myself because I figured it would be simple enough and wouldn't take much effort. I started by chopping up the garlic and onions, getting everything ready for the sauce. So far, so good. Then, I put some olive oil in a pan to sauté the garlic and onions. I know the kitchen pretty well, so I was moving quickly, setting up the next steps, and not paying much attention. I'm sure some of you can already tell where this is going. After a few minutes, the garlic was smelling great, and the onions were softening up nicely. I decided to turn up the heat a little to speed up the cooking process. I grabbed the can of tomatoes I had bought earlier, but I must have been so focused on what I was doing that I completely forgot about the pan that was now sitting on a pretty high flame. You can probably guess what happened next. The oil in the pan started smoking, big, thick clouds of smoke, and I realized I had made a huge mistake. Panicking, I grabbed the nearest thing I could think of, the wooden spoon I had been stirring with. In my haste, I did what I thought was the right thing, tried to move the pan off the burner. However, I didn't even think to turn off the heat. The heat from the stove, combined with the oil now starting to burn, led to what I can only describe as a miniature grease fire in my kitchen. The flames weren't massive yet, but they were definitely there. The kitchen was suddenly filled with a sharp, acrid smell, and the flames were dancing around in a way that I knew wasn't going to end well if I didn't act fast. Now, I've never had a kitchen fire before, so my first instinct was to panic. I started slapping at the flames with a dish towel in a frantic attempt to put them out, but it only made things worse. As I flailed, I knocked over the jar of olive oil I had on the counter, and it spilled, making the situation 10 times worse. At this point, the flames had gotten bigger, and the whole pan was engulfed in fire. My kitchen was starting to feel hotter, and I could feel the heat from the flames on my face. My brain went into full panic mode. I had no idea what to do. I remembered reading somewhere that you shouldn't throw water on a grease fire. That's something that had stuck with me for some reason. But in that moment, it didn't matter. I was beyond rational thought. I grabbed the nearest thing to me, which just happened to be a bottle of water, and dumped it straight onto the fire. As soon as I did, there was an explosive sizzle and a burst of flames, way bigger than I'd ever seen in a kitchen before. My hair singed a little, and I felt the heat so intensely that I thought my eyebrows were going to be gone for good. I could barely see at this point. The smoke had gotten so thick that it was hard to breathe, and everything was starting to turn into a blur of panic and chaos. I realized that I needed help, so I grabbed my phone and called my landlord. Now, let me preface this by saying that my landlord is a nice guy. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he's decent. He's the kind of guy who'll fix a leaky faucet or replace a broken light bulb. But in this moment, I thought I could rely on him to help me through this crisis. I dialed his number, and when he picked up, I blurted out, "There's a fire in my kitchen." I think I may have screamed it. The next few seconds were a blur, but my landlord didn't react as quickly as I thought he would. He asked me if I'd tried turning off the stove, and I told him that I couldn't because the flames were too high. He then asked if I had a fire extinguisher, to which I had to answer no, because I didn't own one. I had no idea why I never thought to get one, but I was now seriously regretting it. At this point, I'm pretty sure my landlord panicked too because he told me he was on his way over. I wasn't sure how much help he would be, but I felt a sense of urgency and just hoped he could get here fast. The fire had gotten out of hand, and I could see the smoke filling up the entire kitchen, pouring into the living room, and I knew this was getting serious. My landlord arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only around 10 to 15 minutes. When he got to my door, he didn't knock or announce himself, he just barged in. The poor guy looked like he had been running, and when he saw the fire, he froze. Now, mind you, he's not a firefighter, so his next move was completely unhelpful. He calmly told me, "You should probably call the fire department." I had already done that. While waiting for my landlord to arrive, I had called 911, but the operator had told me they would be there shortly, which was taking what felt like forever. When the fire department arrived, they were quick to extinguish the flames, and thankfully, no one got hurt. The fire didn't spread, but the damage to my kitchen was enough to make me want to bury my face in the ground. The kitchen was destroyed. The cabinets were singed, the counter was covered in soot, and the floor was sticky from the grease and oil that had splattered everywhere. The firemen told me I was lucky I hadn't started a full-on apartment fire, and I thanked them for saving my ass. They gave me a stern talk about fire safety and told me to get a fire extinguisher, which I promised I'd do. In the aftermath, my landlord was a bit awkward about the whole thing. He offered to help pay for some of the damages but, of course, didn't take responsibility for the fact that he should have had a fire extinguisher in the building in the first place. As for me, I had to deal with the fact that my entire kitchen smelled like smoke for days, and I ended up needing to replace most of my cookware and some of the furniture. I learned a valuable lesson that day: always keep your kitchen fire safe, never call your landlord for emergency help unless it's a leaky faucet, and for the love of all things holy, get a fire extinguisher. If you're ever in a panic and thinking of calling your landlord for help, just remember that they may not have the best idea of what to do either. Oh, and don't throw water on a grease fire. That's just begging for trouble. So yeah, TIFU. TIFU by accidentally making my best friend think I was in love with him, and now things are incredibly awkward. So this happened last week, and I've been avoiding my best friend since then because I have no idea how to fix it. I've been sitting on this for a while, and I need to get it out of my system because it's driving me insane. To start, I need to explain a little background. I, 23F, have known my best friend, Sam, 24M, for almost 10 years. We met in middle school, and since then, we've been nearly inseparable. We've been through everything together: bad breakups, family drama, college life, and even weird viral internet trends. We're both single, we've never had any romantic involvement, and the idea of being anything more than friends has never crossed our minds. At least, it hadn't until recently. So, a couple of weeks ago, Sam invited me to go on a mini road trip with him to a nearby beach town. He rented an Airbnb, and the whole thing was supposed to be super chill, just us hanging out, enjoying the sun, and catching up. We've done things like this before, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just a typical, friendly getaway. A few days before the trip, I got some pretty big news. I'd been offered a job promotion at the company I work for, and I was beyond excited. I'd been working toward this for months, and it felt like everything was finally falling into place. I didn't want to tell Sam until after the trip because I wanted to keep things lighthearted, but I knew I'd eventually have to break the news to him. The trip went as planned, and everything seemed great. We spent the days walking along the beach, eating at little cafes, and joking around like we always do. We talked about life, love, and our future plans. As the days went on, I started feeling a little more introspective and a little more emotional than usual. It's hard to explain, but being in this beautiful, relaxed environment made me feel more open and vulnerable. I guess I was just really grateful for my friendship with Sam, and for everything we've shared over the years. One night, after a long day of walking around the town, we decided to sit out on the balcony of the Airbnb with a couple of drinks. We were having one of those heart-to-heart conversations where you just talk about everything, and I ended up telling Sam about the job promotion. I was excited, but also a little nervous about the new responsibilities. It was one of those moments where I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and needed to share my feelings. He was super happy for me, of course, and then he started asking me about my future plans. Like, what I wanted to do with my career, where I saw myself in the next few years, and whether I'd be open to moving to a new city for a bigger opportunity if it came up. We've had these kinds of conversations before, so it wasn't weird at first. But then, for some reason, I started getting emotional. I don't even know why. I guess it was the combination of the drinks, the excitement, and the overall feeling of change in my life. Suddenly, I blurted out, I'm just so glad I have you in my life, Sam. You've been my best friend through everything, and I don't know what I'd do without you." Sam, being Sam, gave me this look of mock surprise and said, "Ah, you're making me all emotional too." But then something strange happened. Instead of just brushing it off like we usually would, I felt like he was staring at me longer than usual. It was that moment that I should have recognized something was off, but I didn't. I was too wrapped up in my feelings. Then I said, "I don't know, Sam. I've been thinking a lot about our friendship lately. We've been through so much together, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want things to change." It was at that moment that I realized I'd probably said too much. He went quiet for a moment, and I could feel the awkwardness building up in the air between us. He took a deep breath and said, "I don't think you have to worry about that. I mean, nothing's going to change, right? We're still going to be best friends, no matter what." I just nodded, feeling like I'd opened up a can of worms I wasn't prepared for. We finished our drinks in silence, and the rest of the night was, to put it bluntly, awkward. Sam didn't act like himself, and neither did I. The vibe had shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. Fast forward to the next morning. We were packing up to leave and head back home, and things were still a little tense. Sam had been distant, which was completely out of character for him. He was usually the type to crack jokes and keep things light, but he wasn't doing that anymore. He seemed almost guarded. The ride home was mostly quiet, except for a few forced conversations about random stuff, and I could tell something was off. The problem was, I had no idea what was off. I figured it was just because we were both tired from the trip, and that maybe things would go back to normal once we got home. But no, things did not go back to normal. The following week, Sam started avoiding me. He didn't answer my texts, and when I called him, he'd either not pick up or text me back hours later with short, clipped responses. This was completely out of character. We've always been in constant communication, so the sudden change in behavior had me freaking out. After a few days of this, I finally decided to confront him. I showed up at his apartment unannounced, and when he answered the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. We sat down on his couch, and I asked him point blank, "Sam, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" And then, it came out. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Look, I've been thinking about what you said during our trip, and I don't know. I guess I've been feeling weird about it." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, and I could see the tension in his face. I think you might be in love with me." I froze. "What?" "Sam, no. I don't, what? That's not what I meant at all." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, but the way you said it, the way you were looking at me. I thought maybe it was, I don't know, something more than friendship." I wanted to die in that moment. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. I had no idea that I'd come across that way. It turns out that my heartfelt admission of how much I appreciated our friendship had somehow made him think I was confessing romantic feelings for him. We talked through it for a while, and eventually, I convinced him that I didn't have romantic feelings for him at all. But even after that, things are still weird. We've talked a couple of times since, but I can't shake the feeling that our friendship will never be the same again. It's hard to know how to act around him now, and I'm just praying that eventually, things will settle back into the easygoing dynamic we once had. Anyway, that's my story. I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate this whole mess without losing my best friend. Wish me luck. TIFU by accidentally becoming my neighbor's anonymous lover for 6 months and ruining her engagement. So this happened over the course of 6 months, but the explosion only happened last week. I'm still recovering from the emotional wreckage. I live in a mid-sized apartment building. It's the kind with one long central hallway and doors lining each side like a hotel. My unit is 308, and across the hall is 309. For most of the 3 years I've lived here, 309 has been a mystery. Tenants came and went without much notice, and I'm not the neighborly type. I keep to myself, work remotely, and generally just exist in my own bubble. About 6 months ago, I ordered a fancy fountain pen and a leather-bound journal from a specialty shop online. I know, very main character, but writing by hand helps me process stuff. The package arrived, but it wasn't outside my door. I asked the front desk and checked tracking. It was marked delivered. I figured it got dropped at the wrong door and would turn up. The next morning, the package was outside my door, neatly placed with a little yellow sticky note that said, "I think this is yours, 309. Nice, I thought. A polite neighbor. I scribbled thanks and stuck it to their door. That should have been the end of it. But a week later, another note appeared, "You're welcome. I love the journal, are you a writer?" I wasn't sure how to respond. It felt weird but harmless. I wrote back, "Not exactly. Just like to write stuff down. Helps me think." This kicked off a full-blown sticky note correspondence. Every few days, I'd get a little yellow square, comments about the weather, recommendations for books, jokes. I replied every time. I started looking forward to it more than I wanted to admit. It was this oddly charming analog text chain with someone I hadn't even seen. I even stopped checking my phone in the mornings, going straight to the door to see if a new note was there. Then it got flirty. It started subtly. "Your handwriting is sexy." I laughed it off with a reply like, "Yours isn't bad either." But the notes escalated. Compliments turned into fantasies, which turned into letters. Actual pages slipped under my door or taped in envelopes. There were confessions, short stories, even a poem or two. I wrote back. We joked about having a pen pal affair. I imagined her as this mysterious woman who shared my sense of humor, taste in books, and possibly a thing for stationery. I never asked for a name. She never gave one. We reveled in the anonymity. It was like something out of a rom-com, except it was real and happening just across the hall. Then last week, all hell broke loose. It started with screaming. At like 2 in the morning. Loud enough to wake me up. I opened my door to peek, and saw the door to 309 wide open. A guy was standing in the hallway, barefoot and furious, clutching a wad of papers. My handwriting. My goddamn letters. He shouted, "This is who your ing writing love letters to? A stranger? Someone you don't even know?" I didn't move. I ducked back inside and locked my door. My heart was pounding. I had no idea there was a boyfriend involved, let alone a fiancé, as I later found out. A few hours later, I heard a suitcase rolling down the hall. The woman from 309 was crying. She didn't knock on my door. Just left. The next day, I got a note. The last one. It said, "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't know how to stop once it started. I should have told you. I was engaged. I guess I wanted to feel something different before I settled. You were safe because you weren't real. But then you were. I never even saw your face. That was it." She moved out 2 days later. I haven't told anyone. I feel like I participated in emotional cheating without even realizing it. I didn't know she was in a relationship. I never asked. I let myself get caught up in the fantasy. Now there's this empty unit across the hall, a silent space that used to feel magical and exciting. I keep looking at my door in the morning, half expecting a yellow note, even though I know none are coming. And the worst part? I miss her. I miss someone I never even saw. TIFU. By getting way too involved in my girlfriend's family tradition. This happened last weekend, and I'm still dealing with the social fallout. I, 29M, have been dating my girlfriend, 27F, for almost a year. We've had a great relationship. She's funny, smart, and way out of my league. Things have been getting serious lately, and she invited me to her parents' cabin in Vermont for their annual family weekend. Now, I'm not from a big family. It's just me and my mom, and we didn't have traditions growing up. So when my girlfriend said her family was very into their traditions, I was like, cool, how intense can it be? The weekend starts off okay. Her parents are nice, her two brothers are decent guys, and her little sister is off at college but FaceTimes in for dinner. Everyone seems chill. Then Saturday rolls around, and her dad announces it's time for the game. I ask what that means, and everyone gets really vague. Her brother says, "You'll see." Her mom just says, "It's a surprise." Surprise is one word for it. They all start getting ready, putting on old, mismatched clothes and boots, like they're about to go paintballing in 1997. My girlfriend hands me some beat-up jeans and a long-sleeve shirt and says, "You might want to wear these." I ask again what we're doing, and she just laughs and says, "Trust me. You'll love it." Famous last words. We all pile into 2 trucks and drive about 20 minutes into the woods, down a bumpy trail that looks like it hasn't seen maintenance since Y2K. We park near a clearing with a little cabin/shed thing and a bunch of random junk scattered around, old tires, pallets, even a shopping cart. I ask if we're doing some kind of paintball or airsoft thing. Her dad goes, "Nah. We're playing Screaming Goats." I think he's joking. He is not. Here's the game. Everyone gets assigned a goat name. Mine was Brutus, and we have to navigate through a homemade obstacle course in the woods while trying to collect flags hanging from trees. But here's the catch, if someone sees you, they can challenge you. And then you have to do a scream-off. Literally, you have to scream like a goat. Loudest, longest, most ridiculous scream wins. The loser has to drop their flags and go back to the beginning. There are bonus points for creativity. If you incorporate a goat action, like headbutting a tree or climbing a rock, you get extra credit. There are points deducted if you stay silent or break character. I thought this was an elaborate prank. It wasn't. They had scorecards. They had a whiteboard with rules laminated in plastic. They had goat costumes in a storage bin behind the shed. I looked at my girlfriend like, "You cannot be serious," and she just puts on a pair of fuzzy horns and says, "Come on, Brutus. It's tradition." I didn't want to be the lame boyfriend. So I went all in. Like, all in. I got competitive. I screamed so loud I made myself hoarse within 20 minutes. I climbed a boulder and did a wild spinning jump to snatch a flag mid-air. I belly crawled through a drainage pipe to ambush her brother and challenged him to a scream duel that ended with me on my knees in the mud, bleeding like Satan's kazoo. I was killing it. I even started improvising. I charged a tree stump and yelled "Bar RY bonds," like some goat/baseball pun. I constructed a little headband from vines and declared myself the GOAT goat. Her mom called me a natural. It was stupid. It was exhausting. And I was winning. After nearly 3 hours, the sun was going down, and her dad announced that it was time for the final event, the King Goat Gauntlet. Apparently, the person with the most flags, is me, has to run a final sprint through the forest while everyone else tries to stop them by pelting them with soft objects, beanbags, pine cones, and, I swear to God, plush goats. I thought they were joking. Again, not joking. I start sprinting. I'm dodging pine cones. I'm hurling myself over logs. I'm screaming my goat scream like a lunatic. I make it to the end and raise my arms in victory, just as her dad blows the whistle. And that's when I realize I'm standing in the middle of a full campsite. With actual strangers. Watching. Turns out, their property backs onto a state campground. I had barreled, shirt half-ripped, dirt-streaked, goat screaming at the top of my lungs, into the middle of someone's cozy campfire dinner. A little girl screamed. A grown man dropped his beer. One of the campers, clearly ex-military, jumped to his feet like he was ready to fight me. I froze. Her whole family came running after me in goat gear, yelling he's the king goat, and cheering like lunatics. It took 5 very awkward minutes to explain that we weren't on drugs or part of some cult. Just a family tradition, you know? Just some normal weekend fun. We got escorted off the campground by a park ranger. Thankfully, no fines, but a very stern warning. Back at the cabin, everyone thought it was hilarious. Her mom couldn't stop laughing. Her brother said I was a legend. My girlfriend kissed me and called me the goatiest goat of all time. But the next day, on the drive home, she got a text from her sister. Apparently, one of the campers posted a video of me screaming and running into their camp on TikTok. It went viral. Last I checked, it had over 3 million views, and the top comment was, "When your edibles hit mid-hike." I'm a meme now. My coworkers found it Monday morning and won't stop calling me Bleat Boss. My boss emailed me a screenshot and said, "So this is how you unwind on the weekends?" My mom texted me a link and just said, "Is this you?" I haven't told her the full story yet. So yeah, I got too into my girlfriend's family goat game and ended up a viral cryptid. But I did win King Goat. So I've got that going for me. TIFU by accidentally live streaming my boss's surprise party, and my panic-induced lie about being a spy. This happened last weekend and my life is still recovering. I work for a mid-sized tech company where we pride ourselves on being quirky, tight-knit, and just the right amount of dysfunctional. We had been planning a surprise 50th birthday party for our boss, Greg, for weeks. It was to be held at the office, catered with tacos and cake, and full of inside jokes and pranks. Everyone was excited, and I was on the planning committee. My main job was to capture the event for our internal social media group on Slack. Innocent, right? A few photos, maybe a boomerang of Greg blowing out candles. But I'm a bit of a tech dork, and in an effort to be cool and elevate the content, I decided I'd stream the whole thing live using our company's private YouTube channel. Seemed simple. I set up my phone on a tripod, synced it to the YouTube account, and when Greg was walking in, I hit go live. Here's where everything began to unravel. First, I didn't realize I had connected to my personal YouTube account. Not my company's. So instead of a quiet internal stream, it was broadcast to the 1,342 subscribers on my personal channel, mostly friends, family, and some randoms who still follow me from my old gaming content days. I noticed this mistake about 3 minutes in when I started seeing a stream of confused comments popping up on my phone. Who TF is Greg? Is this a prank channel now? Why are you filming some dude crying with tacos? It was supposed to be a funny, lighthearted moment, but Greg got really emotional. Like sobbing in his taco emotional. He'd been going through some personal stuff and apparently didn't know that so many people at work cared about him. It was touching. But watching a grown man cry while a mariachi band plays Despacito is not exactly YouTube gold. The comments got weird. People started screen recording. Someone donated $20 via Super Chat and said, "Tell Greg I love him." I panicked. I froze. I tried to end the stream but fumbled my phone, knocking over the tripod. It clattered to the ground, camera still rolling, now showing nothing but a blurry image of someone's foot and a half-eaten Cheeto. In my scramble to regain control, I knocked over a bowl of guacamole into my laptop bag. Greg, if oblivious, thought it was all part of the surprise and gave me a big, tearful hug. My mind was screaming, "End the stream." But before I could, my friend Danny ran up and said, "Dude, your stream is blowing up. It's on Reddit already." What? I looked at my notifications. Sure enough, someone had posted it to /r/cringe and /r/unexpected with the caption "Guy cries over tacos while coworkers cheer and mariachi band plays Despacito." There were already hundreds of comments. So, in that moment of sheer panic, I did the worst possible thing. I told everyone in the room, "Guys, I need to come clean. I'm actually undercover. For the CIA. That stream? A dead drop. Just pretend none of this happened." Silence. I have no idea why those words came out of my mouth. I think my brain had just melted. I was hoping it would be taken as a joke, that people would laugh. But everyone just stared. A full mariachi band. Greg with tears down his cheeks. My manager with a cupcake halfway to her mouth. Then Greg goes, "Wait. I knew it. I always thought there was something off about you." And just like that, the room turned into a Canday session where I tried to backpedal but only dug the hole deeper. "How long have you been undercover? Do you have to kill us now? Wait, were the tacos bugged?" Eventually, I managed to convince people it was a joke. A very, very poorly executed joke. But the damage was done. The stream had over 23,000 views by that night, and someone edited a TikTok montage of Greg crying, the mariachi band, me saying I'm CIA, and the guac disaster, set to dramatic music. It went viral. It got posted on a few meme pages. My aunt called me the next morning asking if I was safe. The company was not pleased. Our HR person called me in for a very tense conversation where she started with, "Are you or have you ever been affiliated with a government intelligence agency?" I said no, obviously, and explained everything. She sighed and said, "I've worked here 12 years. That's a first." To be clear, I didn't get fired. But I was strongly encouraged to take a few days off, and the company has now introduced a content creation policy which includes a 14-point checklist and a 2-hour training module on responsible internal broadcasting. Greg, to his credit, was extremely cool about the whole thing. He even posted a photo of himself holding a taco with the caption "My 50th, CIA approved," and tagged me. He still tears up about it, which I guess is sweet. But now people in the office call me the mole. And no one lets me near the camera anymore. TIFU by trying to spice up my long-distance relationship with a surprise video call. So this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm just now recovering from the emotional whiplash. My girlfriend and I have been doing long distance for about 7 months now. She's in grad school across the country, and I work in IT from home. We make it work with daily calls, weekend movie nights over Zoom, and lots of texting. But, as many long-distance couples know, sometimes you want to bridge the physical gap a bit more intimately. So I decided to plan something special for her birthday. She had a huge midterm on her actual birthday, so we agreed to celebrate the weekend after. But I wanted to surprise her that night anyway. I came up with what I thought was a genius idea. I'd send her a cute care package with her favorite snacks and a handwritten note, and then later that night, I'd surprise her with a video call wearing nothing but a bow and maybe a smile. I got the timing perfect, or so I thought. I overnighted the package to her apartment, which she shares with 2 other grad students, and made sure it would arrive that afternoon. I sent her a text saying, "Check your front door," smiley face, and she responded with a heart emoji and a bunch of crying faces. I felt good. This was going well. Later that night, I set the mood. Candles, Marvin Gaye playing softly in the background, lighting set just moody enough to be sexy but not creepy. I tied a red ribbon around my chest like a sash and set up the camera at just the right angle. I made sure my hair looked decent and even spritzed myself with cologne for no one's benefit but my own confidence. I had the whole speech planned, something about how even if we couldn't be together, she still unwrapped the best gift of all. I FaceTimed her. It rang for a bit longer than usual. She finally answered with her camera off and whispered, "Hey, now's not a good time." I whispered back, "Oh come on, just for a second. I have a surprise for you." There was a pause. I heard some background voices. Then she said, "Okay, just make it quick." That's when I hit the button to flip the camera from my face to the full view. I stepped back, smiling, standing in the frame in all my glory, naked except for the red ribbon. I threw my arms open. "Happy birthday, babe." There was silence. Way too much silence. Then her camera turned on. It was not just her. It was her. and her roommates, and one of their professors, and a PowerPoint presentation in the background. I had just flashed an entire thesis group meeting. I stared in horror as the tiny Zoom square expanded. Her roommate's mouth was wide open, the professor's eyebrows were raised to his hairline, and my girlfriend's face was the human embodiment of the "this is fine" meme. Then I realized she had been screen sharing. My birthday strip show had been broadcast on a 60-inch flat screen in the living room to 6 people. 6 very stunned, very academic people. I fumbled with the phone. My brain couldn't process what had just happened. I hit the end call button, dropped my phone, and just stood there for a second like an idiot, still holding my birthday pose. My girlfriend called me back about 10 minutes later, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe, but also deeply, deeply mortified. Apparently, right before I called, she had been presenting a section of a group project for one of her sociology classes. Her professor had been invited to listen in and offer feedback. They had just finished her portion when I called. She thought she could sneak in a quick answer without turning off screen sharing. She didn't expect me to be the gift. According to her, the professor coughed, said, "Well, that's a first," and logged off immediately. One of her roommates screamed, the other applauded. The group sat in stunned silence for about 45 seconds before someone said, "So, does this count as a visual aid?" Needless to say, I am now a legend in her department. Her roommates still occasionally send me gift bows in the mail. Her professor hasn't acknowledged it, but he also hasn't replied to any of her emails without adding "hope you're doing well" in bold font, which feels like a passive-aggressive peace offering. The worst part? My girlfriend still made me finish the birthday speech later, fully clothed, while making direct eye contact with her phone camera. And I still blush every time I hear Marvin Gaye. TIFU by accidentally giving my girlfriend's dad the impression that I run a cult. This happened a few months ago, and I'm just now able to talk about it without breaking into a cold sweat. For context, I, 29M, have been dating my girlfriend, Lena, 27F, for about a year. Things have been going really well, so when her dad came into town for a week, I was excited, and slightly terrified, to meet him. He's ex-military, very stoic, and apparently protective of his only daughter. Now, I'm not a religious person, but I do host what I call Sunday gatherings at my place. It started during the pandemic as a virtual D&D group that turned into a real-world friend circle. Every Sunday, I cook a huge vegetarian meal, we all wear robes. It started as a joke, then became a theme, light some incense, and talk about life, philosophy, books we're reading, and just decompress. Think of it like a nerdy dinner club with mild pagan aesthetics. Totally harmless. Well, Lena suggested we have her dad join us for a Sunday since I already had the group coming over and it would be a relaxed setting. I hesitated because I wasn't sure he'd get the vibe, but she convinced me. "He's actually very open-minded," she said. "He'll appreciate something different." Famous last words. Sunday arrives. I'm cooking lentil stew and homemade bread. The apartment smells amazing. Everyone shows up in their robes, and I give Lena a spare one for her dad, mostly to help him feel included. When he arrived, I greeted him with a hug, mistake number 1, he's a handshake guy, offered him a robe, mistake number 2, he thought I was kidding, I was not, and handed him a cup of hibiscus tea with honey, mistake number 3, he thought it was wine, and he's been sober 15 years. So he's already on edge when the rest of the group begins to arrive. We're a very diverse bunch. My friend Paolo brings his boyfriend, Trina shows up in a velvet cloak and 3 crystals tied into her hair, and Josh, our resident overachiever, brought a homemade kombucha starter he's named the Oracle. We all sit on cushions on the floor around the low table. I dim the lights, light incense, and begin our usual opening. We each go around, light a candle, and say one thing we're grateful for and one intention for the week. It's very Whole Foods very crunchy, and generally quite chill. Until Lena's dad is up. He stands. And instead of lighting the candle, he says, "I'd like to say that I'm grateful my daughter is still alive, and my intention is to find out what the hell is going on here. Dead silence. You could hear the incense crackling. Paulo chokes on his tea. Josh reaches for his kombucha like it's going to protect him. Trina says, "This is a safe space, you're welcome to express discomfort," which, while well-intentioned, sounded eerily like something a cult leader might say. Her cloak did not help. I try to explain. I say this isn't a cult, just a gathering of friends. I make a joke, if we were a cult, we'd probably have a cooler name than Sunday Gathering, right? Everyone chuckles. Except Lena's dad. He pulls me aside, looks me dead in the eyes, and says, "I've taken down actual cult compounds in Nicaragua. I know what I'm looking at." That's when I realize, he's not joking. This man thinks I've seduced his daughter into a veggie cult with robes and chants. I try to clarify again. I even show him the D&D books on my shelf. He stares at the cover of Curse of Strahd like it's the Necronomicon. At this point, Lena pulls him into the kitchen to talk him down. Meanwhile, my friends are nervously trying to keep things light. Josh pulls out his guitar and starts playing Simon and Garfunkel like that's going to help. 10 minutes later, Lena comes back with the look of a woman who's about to re-enter a room of polite chaos after defusing a bomb. Her dad follows, looking slightly calmer, and sits back down. He doesn't speak for the rest of the evening but does eat 2 bowls of stew and pockets a piece of bread, so I'll take that as a neutral outcome. He leaves early, no goodbye hug this time, and I genuinely think I've blown it. Like, he's going to call Lena and tell her she has to leave before I make her shave her head and hand out flyers at the airport. But here's the twist. 2 weeks later, Lena calls me laughing. Apparently, after a long conversation, he admitted that he may have overreacted, and while he still doesn't get it, he appreciates that everyone seemed respectful and I wasn't trying to control anyone. He even asked for the stew recipe. Still, the next time he visited, we met at an Applebee's. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.